It is a day Penn State football and its fans thought would never happen, but it did happen. You read the headline right. The chants have come into fruition. James Franklin is no longer the head football coach at Penn State, and this is not by choice. James Franklin was fired early Sunday afternoon. Pete Thamel broke the news. Nittany Sports Now confirmed it. And for now, Terry Smith is Penn State football's head coach. Who knows what's going to happen after that? But yeah, it's really hard to find the words for this seismic event, really, in the history of Penn State football. And who knows what happens after this. But at the same time, most people can agree that this change was needed. Penn State started this season as not just a national championship contender, but a national championship favorite. And now it's 3-3 with losses to lowly UCLA and lowly Northwestern. Something had to be done, and Pat Kraft was the one to make the move. James Franklin's buyout, $49 million. That's a heavy price. Losing recruits, also a heavy price. Penn State lost literally its entire 2027 class within a 48-hour window. But here we are. Terry Smith is the interim coach of Penn State, and we're going to talk about it. Joe Smeltzer, Nittany Sports Now, Kyle Fatman, Golik, and Nittany Sports Now, Jay Holahan of Mike Farrell Sports, also our producer. So Jay does a lot for us. But guys, what do you make of all this? And I also have a disclaimer. It's kind of a busy day for me over at Nittany Sports Now. Kyle, also anybody that covers Penn State. So if I'm typing on my phone, there's a reason for that. But Fat Man, we'll start with you. What do you make just of everything that's happened?
So, I'm wrestling with words about this. James Franklin, and it'll be in my legacy column. We'll talk, obviously we'll talk about this. He did a lot for Penn State, and we're going to get into it in a bit. There was this ominous feeling, Joe, and you and I hit the field at the same time together last night, and it was eerie. Like it just seemed like there was something in the air, and one of the things that bothers me a lot is knowing that James walked off the field with the reception that he had, maybe warranted. But then just seeing him visibly shaking at that press conference, I think you can agree now when you can put the context to everything that was there. The thing that bothers me about this is this man came into this program when the teeth of the Jerry Sandusky sanctions were really going to cripple the program. Bill O'Brien said this, all right? He came into the program and he kept the program afloat, and he found several transformative recruits that propelled them for that surprise 2016 run. As Gus Johnson would trumpet on Fox, the return to Camelot. James Franklin made this a top 10 program. His biggest indictment wasn't being able to take it from a top 10 program to the best. That's what it is, number one. What bothers me even more is he came in at the heart of the Sandusky thing, overcame it. Then there was the COVID-19 pivot where there were guys that opted out, went to the draft early. There was a lot of turnover in 20 and 21, but then 22 to 24 was arguably, well, actually, I'll just say it was the most successful when you look at wins and postseason appearances by a Penn State 3-year run since the early 1980s. James Franklin modernized this program. He rebranded this program. A lot of things for the better. It became attractive enough for a guy like Pat Kraft to want to come to. Neely Bendapudi to come to as president of this university with how visible he made it. And, one of the things, and Steve Jones brought this up last week on his show, and I'm with it. James Franklin had earned the right to try to fix the ship. I don't think he got that opportunity here for this one. Grant you, this was by far an epic fail. That is, it is what it is. But in my mind, his record of being able to, you know, meet adversity, overcome it for through a litany of things, I really felt he was warranted that. And now this is on Pat Kraft because now you're saying, Pat, we can do better than just being a top 10 program, which, look, I'm open for. I would love to be able to be in the press box for top 10 wins and national championships and all the above. I'm with you. Hook, line, sinker. The fans, hook, line, and sinker. But you got to find it. And right now, it's all on Kraft. And that'll be in a column that I think will probably be up either later tonight or early tomorrow of what I had done earlier. So those are my opening thoughts. Jay, I kick it to you.
Yeah, I agree with what Kyle said from the get-go. Watching the video of him coming through, through the tunnel.
Which one? Like the whole beat was there. Like
Yeah,
we all took videos of it.
it was very I saw Joe's video. I was very I don't want to say appalled, but just very kind of like, wow. I mean, it's one of those things where it was a tough watch. I mean, I believe he hugged his wife and kids. And at that point, it kind of hit me that, you know what? It's probably for the best. This has kind of gotten to the point to where it's beyond recovery, because I don't know how at this point you could recover from this in the season, losing to the two teams you just lost to. The way they played when they had the late lead, the early week press conference was, I mean, it was very telling when he always mentions, you guys know this, he always goes from the head coach to the water boy in explaining the team he's going to be playing. He didn't do it. And I kind of figured, okay, there's something up here. There is something up here. And to be asked point blank at the end of the press conference whether or not he still wants to be the head coach, that was the telltale sign for someone that has gone through this before with another university in basketball. But to see that was very telling that the wheels were in motion and something was probably going to happen. I figured by noon today we'd have our answer. I was kind of surprised when we didn't, because I was kind of like, well, maybe he might be staying on. But I wasn't shocked is basically the bullet point here. I wasn't shocked.
I mean, the fact that Ali Barubi, who sat behind me last night and asked that question, she's usually pretty optimistic, in her questions. The fact that she was that blunt, and it was a great question. So kudos to Ali. I don't want anyone to think I'm disparaging Ali, but that was like,
And we got to give, not to interrupt, we got to give John Sauber credit for the follow-up question, which followed that same line.
Mm-hmm.
I know Sauber hit it, but Sauber sometimes has a little bit more edge to it. Allie's a little more up. The fact that she came out swinging was kudos to her. And again, Sauber did too. I mean, it was really telling. I mean, that was the first true time in a long time that I really had seen the beat kind of like, James, you got to atone for what is going on, because this is by far unacceptable.
Yeah, we'll give the Franklin file right now for his time at Penn State, because he had a great tenure. He really did. A lot of people might not want to hear that right now, but you laid it out well, Fatman, in the opening. When this guy was hired, a few years removed from the Jerry Sandusky scandal, obviously Bill O'Brien did a great job keeping things together, but James Franklin had to deal with a lot of that fallout too, right? With the lack of scholarships, with having to get guys like Saquon Barkley to stay. And it took a few years, right? Two straight 7-6 seasons to start, but then 2016 happened, and that really changed everything for Penn State. And I think, Kyle, you've mentioned it before to me off the record about, how maybe Penn State got a little too good too soon. And that really raised the bar to heights that we wouldn't have expected come 2017 with Franklin. But 2017 was where kind of the theme started. Penn State had a great team, lost a huge game at Ohio State, lost another big game at Michigan State, and that was really the 2017 season. I think was really where the James Franklin narrative started. Where good recruiter. Look at the guys he recruited that were on that team: Trace McSorley, Saquon Barkley, some of his very best players at Penn State. Right, good at winning the games he's supposed to win. They won nine of their wins were favored, but then when crunch time came against the schools like Ohio State, they fell short. And that 2017 season was really what started that narrative. The 2018 season was where it started to get to Franklin with the good, the great, to elite speech, and then it kind of followed through there. But looking at the numbers, 104-45 at Penn State, 64-36 in the Big Ten, Big Ten championship in 2016, Big Ten title game appearance in 2024, college football playoff appearance in 2024, and 2 playoff wins that led to the expectations of this season where they started number 2 in the country. But 3-3 is never going to cut it at Penn State, and certainly never going to cut it with this roster and with this coaching staff, especially with adding Jim Knowles over the offseason.
Yeah, and Joe, kind of like going back a little bit there, the collapse in the Rose Bowl to me is really when it started, because Penn State had, I believe, a 14 or 15 point lead going into the fourth quarter, and USC just simply ran it up, and then it just compounded with the collapse at Ohio State, and then the Michigan State weather delay game that you alluded to, and then the Ohio State collapse in 18 that was the precursor to the infamous speech. It was something he never was able to fully eradicate. If there's one thing that it's irrefutable, and even James admitted it to us after the Oregon loss this year, is that big game narrative. The thing is, by all accounts, the progression Penn State had gone from 22, 23 to 24 made you believe into this year. It's not crazy to think if you had a senior quarterback who in the regular season last year completed 71% of his passes. You had a running game duo that was the first duo in program history to each have 3,000 yards each in their career. You had an offensive line that was being compared against the early 80s units, the mid 80s units, and the venerable 1994 unit that is spoken very highly of. So essentially the Mike Munchak, Sean Farrell stuff in the early 80s, Steve Wisniewski stuff in the mid 80s, and then Jeff Harding's Marco Rivera, Goon, Bucky Greeley, Andre Johnson in 94. You had a defensive line where it just seemed like Denai Dennis Sutton was the next edge in line. I mean, Penn State's had some amazing edge rushers here this decade, between Adisa Isaac to Chop Robinson to Abdul Carter. That was in place. You had Zane Durant, who was arguably the best interior defensive lineman in the country. Some question marks at linebacker, but had arguably the deepest secondary during James Franklin's time, and really good special teams. The formula was there, guys, for it. This collapse will be something we'll be looking at for years and years to come, because this is probably one of the more fascinating years in Penn State history, and obviously not for the good. Again, if I had an answer to why this happened, I would probably be making millions of dollars being a consultant. I don't have an answer.
And
But
James Franklin's making millions of dollars to exist right now.
God bless his agent. I think it's Jimmy Sexton, right? So it's like, we sit here today and it's like we're at an interesting crossroads. Was it the right move? And that's probably the first thing we're trying to maybe grasp at. And I'm going to sound very much like a politician. I'm on both sides of the coin on this, and I'm going to give an answer after I kind of speak my mind, guys. Obviously, I felt he earned the opportunity to try to fix this. It probably wouldn't have happened this year, but it would have been an opportunity to try to get to a point kind of like how 20 and 21 went, so that we had fruitful years in 22 to 24. I think he had earned that. In the same vein, the significant investment into the Beaver Stadium revitalization project, the how NIL was coming in with how Adidas was wanting to frame Penn State in their portfolio. I don't think Penn State could afford to be mediocre. And I think in this day and age, and this is probably a little bit unfortunate, James Franklin's a casualty to this unrealistic standards that at these elite programs coaches have to live by, because I'm telling you what, guys, one of the toughest things to do is to win a football game. Any coach will tell you that. But to say, hey, you need to be perfect and be near perfect in all these games, I think, this is starting to get to a dicey road. I know Penn State Franklin needed to be better in a lot of other areas, but when you start to realize like just how small it is, that margin of error in those games, because I can tell you what, from that Oregon game, it's probably 3 plays, and that's not an exaggeration. UCLA and Northwestern, those games, it's where it all fell off the rails. And I can't, but as I pass this on to Jay or you, Joe, I truly feel at its essence it was a bad move. I think for a business side it was a good move, but at the essence of what collegiate athletics are, of preparing the youth to do whatever the vocation is, James
But
Franklin.
it's not about that anymore. I mean,
I will say, let me disagree with you on this. The preparing the vocation part of, a lot of people think of that as, going to class. It's not for football players. It's what do they do on the football field, because it's all about getting to the NFL. James Franklin had a program that only Georgia and Alabama are the 2 other programs to have at least 5 or more players selected in the NFL draft the last 8 drafts. So maybe that tells you where his weakness was. Maybe he had the talent and just didn't know how to coach in those situations. I don't know, but like I said, at its essence, Joe, and this is where I'll always live on this, it was a bad move, but from a business side, it was a great move. So take it as you will, guys.
Yeah, I would probably say that is the biggest indictment for him. I mean, if you look at that little stat right there, I think that really tells the story of James Franklin in those big games. I mean, you're watching games on Sunday like today. I mean, Parker Washington making plays, seeing Brenton Strange, Tyler Warren, Theo Johnson, tight ends that were all there at the same time. They're making plays, and I know obviously only one tight end can be on the field typically at the same time. But it's just interesting how many players he has had, how many players you're watching on NFL Sundays, how many guys got drafted. I mean, I watched Nick Scott celebrate with the special teams kicker today with the Panthers. That was interesting as well, to see he's still in the NFL. But I think, to me, the one thing that James Franklin could just never hit on that I thought he really had this year and he had last year was the interior of that offensive line and defensive line. I thought was going to be very strong, and that was going to help push Penn State to obviously not get pushed around by UCLA or a Northwestern. And when that happened, and like you said, Kyle, I think when that happened, that's what really set the wheels in motion, that it was going to be time to move on.
Yeah, and I'll say too, this was a good point brought up by Donnie Collins, a friend, a colleague from Scranton. He wrote on Twitter that in some ways what Penn State did was mercy for Franklin, because how do you imagine, like, okay, they got two on the road without Drew Aller, probably losing to Iowa, certainly losing to Ohio State. They come back and they drop another one to Indiana. How do you, like, Jay, with what you were talking about and what me and Kyle witnessed in person, how do you let that happen again to anybody? I don't care what you're making. I don't care what your responsibilities are. How do you put somebody through that again? So I think, obviously, that's not the main reason they fired James Franklin. They fired him because of the results. But I wonder if that was part of what Pat Kraft was thinking too, is that, like, no human being should have to go through
Yeah.
this to this extent all the time.
Yeah.
I
I mean,
disagree. I disagree with that. And this is
You don't think he would have got booed if they lost to
he
Nebraska?
would have got he, there would have been some booze, but
Some.
I think he
You
would
were
have
you
got
were there yesterday.
Yeah.
I was there, yes, but I think there comes a point where fans even realize like we're beating a dead horse. Number one, number two, like it was mentioned, Drew Aller's gone for the season. It isn't like they're 100% out there. They're down Drew Aller, Tony Rojas, and numerous other athletes this year. So to me, it's like crying over spilled milk. It's spilled already. Is he going to get? Would he have gotten booed? Yeah, but probably not to the extent of it because it's kind of a foregone conclusion. The season's over. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I also know that. I mean, you look at the ticket prices on I know someone that has season tickets there. The homecoming game yesterday, it was $20 a pop, and the person told me that is not usually the ticket price for a homecoming game. I don't care if it's against Northwestern. So it was certainly, I think, when you talk about that business standpoint, that had to be where everyone was especially coming from.
All right, we're about 23 minutes in here. First live edition of Joe and the Fat Man. Thanks everybody for joining us. Let's talk about Terry Smith because it's a heck of a situation, right? And it's similar in some ways to the situation Tom Bradley walked into. Now, I'm not comparing this to what happened 14 years ago. It's not that at all. This is strictly for football related reasons and nothing else. But, Tom Bradley worked with Joe Paterno, played for Joe Paterno, knew him for 30 years. Then he achieves a dream job becoming the head coach of Penn State, but it's under the circumstances of Joe Paterno being fired. Terry Smith played at Penn State, worked under James Franklin for 11 and a half seasons. Now he's got what has to be a dream job, and he has to deal with his close friend being fired too. So it really is a heck of a thing to walk into, right? When you have the job, and I'm sure Terry's going to be asked about this when he talks with us Monday. You have the job you've always wanted, but under like nightmarish circumstances, right?
Yeah, this is not what Terry Smith envisioned his situation to being in. Hey, I'm the interim
Yeah.
head coach at
And I'll
Penn
say, I
State.
don't think Terry ever planned on being a head coach at all. I think
No,
this
not
just
at all.
happens. So
It's a situation where he has to try to keep everything together. Right now, this is probably one of the most key transition periods in the program because right now you have a period where fans are going to be wondering what can you do to kind of salvage this thing, and I really don't think, Joe, this season is salvageable. Just talking to those players last night, and I understand last night was last night and they were down in the dumps, but they've been demoralized for 3 consecutive weeks. The coach they love was fired. In my opinion, I think Franklin in some ways was fired unceremoniously just because there's a tone that was given out last night. Maybe I'm reading too much into the lines, but there's a lot of things that didn't add up. And we'll probably never know the truth, but that team's been impacted a lot. And they lost their quarterback, Drew Aller, for the season. Like a lot of those players learned firsthand from us because Joe, in all your time on the beat and all my time, I can't remember James ever just coming out, sitting down, and just being like, "Yeah, this player's out for the season," and just
No, yeah, that would be a first. Yeah, especially it's not like it happened early in the game either. It happened with about 2 minutes left. So that's
yeah,
just
like that. Like there was so much off. Terry has, you know, has an unenviable task right now. This team, you know, when a new coach is named, there's now I think either a 5 or a 15-day period where they're able to that a portal opens for them to go. That'll be on top of the off-season portal window that they have as well. So he has to try to find a way to keep these guys invested in the program because potentially he may still be here. He may be retained. A lot of these assistants are now also fighting to get either retained here or jobs elsewhere. So it's a very trying time. I mean, there's going to be a lot of motivation to kind of right the ship, but Grunkmeyer, I'm going to be behind him no matter. But his play never inspired me to think that he could do this long term. Kind of like how, Bo, not just because what Bo's doing this year at Missouri, but Bo showed even in a handful of plays before he was thrusted last season in the spotlight against Wisconsin that he could make a player, he could be there for a sustained period of time. I don't think Ethan's ready yet. I don't think, just thinking how that competition was, I I look at the defensive side of the ball, and again, this will be a column coming out probably tomorrow about how Jim Knowles broke the bread and butter of this defense. I don't know how they're going to stop anybody. I mean, unless a team is that bad, I just don't see it. I just think his team is so defeated right now. I'd love to see them rally and do something very special to at least for themselves, for James guys, but it's just I have a hard time. Like if you were to say, put a gun to my head and say, what do you think Penn State's going to do the rest of the way? If they 1-5 tops is where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I mean, you feel for Terry Smith. I'm glad they went with Terry too, because the one guy that I think a lot of people were anticipating who has head coaching experience, of course, would be Stan Drayton. But obviously, Terry has that relationship with the players.
it had to be Terry just
Yeah.
because he's a Penn State guy, played at Penn
Yep.
State. He is the associate head coach. Has the relationships. I think he was the man.
Absolutely. So I'm glad they went with Terry. I just, when you look at that sideline, I mean, there was no fight. There was no fire. I just didn't feel at all there was any fire. Like, and I know in the past it's changed. We talked about the 2016-17 seasons. You used to get the Penn State football story, and they would give you some access to the locker room, and you could see what was going on. And you would see guys like a Trace McSorley, a Saquon Barkley. I think one of the offensive linemen I forget exactly who it was, but against Minnesota in 2019 when they lost, smashing his helmet against the wall. You could just feel the passion and that they were pissed off. I never really got that sense in this season. I just didn't when they would pan to the camera on the sideline. You just never saw that kind of fire, that kind of fight. And that's just something too that needs to be that spark that gets these guys going. And I mean, this is an all-time low for these guys. I mean, they thought it was bad losing their quarterback. Losing to Northwestern, UCLA, and Oregon has to be nothing compared to this, because now that locker room has to be in real rough shape. And could you imagine Kyron Hudson, Traber Pena, Devontae Ross kind of looking around like, holy shit, what did we get ourselves into?
Yeah, can you imagine being Tyser Denmark and Kobe Howard, who just weren't allowed to help?
Yep, absolutely.
And I'm not trying to kick James when he was down. What's done is done. But
Mm-hmm.
how do you let Liam Clifford, who's a great guy, I've enjoyed talking with him, good blocker, hard player, except for whatever he was doing on that Drew Aller interception yesterday.
Mhm.
How do you let him play over two guys that could be real dynamic playmakers in this offense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was almost sometimes a fight with James to get to see the young guys get out there. Like, he had his light system, red, yellow, and green. I don't get why, how so many of these receivers failed. Keandre Lambert Smith has made it onto an everyday NFL roster. Omari Evans has looked good at Washington, and Trey Wallace. I almost said Trey Harris because he went down to Ole Miss, and that was another Ole Miss receiver. But Trey Wallace has looked good down there. It's starting to wonder, what the issue is on the perimeter, because at the early part of James's tenure, Penn State did not have wide receiving problems. I mean, as of
Yeah.
like even 2021, Jahan Dotson went to the NFL.
That's
First
even
round
Parker
pick.
Washington too.
Yeah, Parker Washington even a few years after the fact.
And
So it seemed like after that 2021 group, who was ever part of that group and waned off, they never really replaced them well.
yeah, it was almost very weird how that just dropped off. I mean, they moved on to Hagen's, and things just have never really developed at wide receiver. It's one of the most puzzling questions in his tenure, and certainly the last couple seasons.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about potential replacements. We're going to get into the overall Franklin legacy later on, but about halfway through, this is a good time to mention guys that we might like to see become the head coach of Penn State. A few names we've been seeing tossed around on social media. I think the one you're going to see, the two you're going to see the most for different reasons are Matt Rule and Kirk Cignetti. You're going to see Matt Rule because of the obvious. He played at Penn State. Him and Pat Kraft are the closest of friends. He's done well enough in his college career to where he could at least be argued as a worthy candidate for Penn State. So that's the name you're going to see. But judging by the reactions on social media, Penn State fans don't want Matt Rule. The second name that the fans are really driving is Kirk Cignetti, and that's, what more can you say? Leads Indiana to the playoffs in year one from the ashes of the Big Ten cellar, and now year two has gone even better with the latest being a win over Oregon, which I think Indiana personally should be number one in the country, but they're number three, and that is what it is. But there aren't a lot of coaching names hotter than Kirk Cignetti right now, and if you weren't in his 60s, his age is really the only drawback here. And then the third one is kind of the outsider because he hasn't coached in a while, and his last coaching stop was in the NFL and didn't go too well. Urban Meyer, he was linked to Penn State in 2011. He almost came in 2011. It didn't work out. Is Urban Meyer a guy that Penn State would want? And could he coach in this modern era of college football? So those are some names, fellas, of the names I didn't mention. Who are you thinking about kicking around?
Am I allowed to quote the legendary David Jones about Urban Meyer, Joe?
Joe, you're muted.
You're muted, Joe.
Oh, sorry. We're live. Can't do nothing about it. If Dave said that publicly, then why not? It's out there.
It is. I mean, so for those who don't know, Dave Jones, one of the venerable writers this beat's ever had, who was probably could get to. Guys from Ohio, Columbus. He loved needling us, and he was so good. He was the perfect foil. So he was on with Bob Flounders last week, and he was like, Urban Meyer's the biggest prick to ever coach, and why he could never coach in this era is because he can't have the leverage he once had, and the reason he failed with the Jaguars was he was just too much of a prick to them down there, and they wouldn't put up with it. So no, the answer to that question is emphatically no. So where am I go? Who are my guys? So I don't have Cignetti. Rule would be an absolute, like, if Penn State ends up with Matt Rule, a lot of people said no. I'm just going to say that. If that's who Penn State ends up with, Pat Kraft did not hit a home run with it. So who are my three guys that I am high on for this? So the first one I'm going to go with, this is my number 3. Here's the thing. I think they need someone who has bona fide head coaching experience for this job. But if there is the prominent coordinator out there for it that checks a lot of the boxes, it's Will Stein out of Oregon.
I don't think
There's
hiring an assistant coach would go over well ever, though.
it would not. He's my number 3. I originally was going to say Kenny Dillingham, but in my heart of hearts, I don't see Dillingham leaving Arizona, being in the position that he's in, because he's already been in the college football playoff. He has access to it. He'd be going to a much harder job. So I have Stein at 3. Number 2, on the Kirk Cignetti train, I'm not necessarily looking at Kurt himself, but I'm looking at his replacement at James Madison, Bob Chesney, as his head coach. I know John Sauber's real high on him as well. He's a Pennsylvania native. Granted, he was a defensive-minded coach, but the fact that he kept JMU in the position that they did after Cignetti literally took his entire team with him to Indiana speaks volumes of what he brings to the proverbial table. My number 1 guy at the moment, is Missouri's Elia Drinkowitz. And this guy has won in the Sun Belt. He's had Missouri's first consecutive double-digit winning seasons, I believe, ever in their program history. They did beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl a few years ago, and the guy seems to be an offensive mastermind and very outspoken. So those are my top 3 as of infancy into this project, without really knowing too much who's all involved in the search.
And he could take Bo Pribula with him, and it wouldn't look like Bo just used Missouri. Bo would have a very legitimate reason for going back to Penn State.
It's true.
Yeah, it's kind of a realistic expectations versus dream expectations. If you could get Kurt Cignetti, my God, I mean, what that would do for Penn State, the potential there for Penn State. I'm with you.
Sorry, Jay. I got to address our comments. GOJTO48, he brought up a good point, saying that Cignetti's age is not the only drawback. His desire to come there is another issue. I agree. Why it's hard to leave what you're building at Indiana right now. I do. Thanks for watching, GOJ, and I agree.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Number 3, Indiana for football. Like, what are we talking about here? I mean, what universe are we in that Indiana is number 3 in football? We've all seen that stadium. It's empty half the time, and they're number 3 in the country. I mean, not anymore, obviously, over the period of time.
I mean, Lee Corso for years on Sunday morning had to go on Indiana television and explained why Indiana lost football games. So,
yeah,
that's the history of that program to a T.
Absolutely. I mean, it would be a great hire. Do I see it happening? Probably not. Matt Rule, I feel like that's probably where Penn State is going to end up. If I had to have a betting favorite, I think they land him. Just because he's not he's a Penn State guy. He built up Temple, and that's Temple. And for a lot of years, the recruits that they were getting were the guys that most likely would have been at Penn State if, we didn't have what was going on at the time. But does Matt Rule really move the needle? I don't know. I can't see it. But another guy that could end up back at Penn State is Manny Diaz. Do we love that? I don't know. He didn't really inspire you at Miami. And he's doing really well at Duke, which is kind of like what Kurt Cignetti's been doing at Indiana, although not on as big of a scale, and you're at the ACC level. But that could be someone we see Penn State go in the direction as well.
I don't like the Manny Diaz idea. Not because I thought he did fine in Miami. They wanted crystal ball, and it just kind of happened that way. But why would you want to hire a guy that was so closely tied with the Franklin era for 2 years? That doesn't
It's
make
true.
sense to me. I think they need a guy that has a different personality from Franklin, and I feel this way with all head coaching changes in any sport. The example I always use is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Tony Dungy and John Gruden. They go from Tony Dungy, very laid back, very calm, obviously a great coach. He proved that in Tampa Bay and then proved that after Tampa Bay in Indianapolis. But they get rid of him, trade for the fiery, intense, F bomb every 5 seconds, John Gruden. And what do? They win the Super Bowl. That's the example I always use. And there's many others, but I think you need a guy that's different in personality from James Franklin and, not tied with the Franklin era either.
What would you describe Franklin's personality necessarily as? I mean, is he really laid back? He doesn't
No.
he doesn't strike me
No.
as a fiery guy either. Like he's just kind of
I would say charismatic is the right
okay.
word.
Yeah. And also the isms. I mean, are you guys happy to not have to hear obviously, and I get it after losses and 1-0 every week?
Pretty much,
Yeah,
yeah.
any coach is going to have a cliche, though.
True.
Yeah, I went after a couple of guys last night about the 1-0 mantra, just for that sheer reason. Because if you guys believe in this mission, you wouldn't be in a 3-game skid. You wouldn't be on a down the tubes tour. I've seen some people say Lane Kiffin. He ain't leaving Ole Miss. I'm just putting that out there right now.
He ain't moving to State College.
Well, no. And then secondly, if Penn State fans didn't like James Franklin not winning big games, look at Lane Kiffin's mark in those games. It's not very good either. Lance Leipold's always a name that's thrown out there. He's always a trendy thrown out there. PJ Fleck is another one. I mean, I saw
PJ Fleck.
That would be bad. Like, that means we totally missed the boat. And like, if he brought a boat to State College, I would probably laugh pretty hard whenever I pass it in the tunnel. I know Brenneman brought up Marcus Freeman and Dabo Sweeney. I don't see that in a million years.
For the same reason why Signetti wouldn't leave Indiana, why would Freeman leave Notre Dame? I mean, the only
why would Dabo leave Clemson? That's his program.
Yeah, exactly. If they're not willing to buy him out too.
I don't see Lance Leipold leaving Kansas for this. I think he's destined to Wisconsin, to be honest. Chris Kleiman of Kansas State's stock has dropped. Matt Campbell's another James Franklin. That's another name that's thrown out there, the Iowa State coach. Someone joked on another podcast that they should get Brett Bielema, and I just said, that's a good joke in itself. I'm just, Brian Hartline was a name that was brought up. And again, Rule has to hit a home run here. And that's a reach. Like Steen and Rule are such, like, that's a risk. Like when Dan Lanning left Georgia for Oregon, the thing with Lanning was he was so charismatic. He was young. He was like really, really established and really had his things together. I just don't know what those two. I mean, I'll tell you what, Brian Hartline's arguably the best wide receiver coach and recruiter in the country. And I think he's right now a co-coordinator over on Day's staff. And Stein's doing what he's doing out in Oregon. But if this program goes with a coordinator, it has to be a home run, like a Kirby Smart to Georgia, a Dan Lanning to Oregon. It has to be.
And I'm glad you brought up Kirby because that was the guy. Remember, Tennessee thought they were too good for him. How'd that go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like I said, you start looking around here. It's a tough landscape. That's why this is going to get really, really interesting here. I think Penn State's going to have a coach by the beginning of December. I really do.
Absolutely.
They have to. I don't think that's really an option in modern college football, especially with the head start they're getting.
Yeah, and I think that's why they had to make the decision now rather than later, because I think they figured already it's not salvageable. Why don't we just cut bait now so we can at least get a head start for the next guy? And the next guy, we talk about all these names and all these different schools. You have to be willing to put up with the amount of media coverage you are going to be getting, the fan base you're going to be getting, because I've always compared Penn State to kind of like a team like the Yankees of the NFL, because of the fan base. And I'm not talking about on the winning end. I'm just talking about because of the fans that you have there, how nuts Penn State fans are. I mean, you're going top to bottom down the eastern seaboard, because it wouldn't surprise me if there's some Penn State country up in New England. I know there's a solid presence in New York City, obviously from Philadelphia out to Pittsburgh, all over the state. You're going to have to be willing to put up with this kind of fan base, this kind of attention. And I'll give Franklin credit. He at least did his best, but it's a very, very tough job to be willing to take.
Yeah.
Which is why I also agree you need someone with experience as well.
Yeah, I will say, I think they'll have a coach before the end of the regular season. I don't think there's any reason that can't happen.
No, I don't think there is either.
If that's the case, then, one of the names we mentioned here today.
Wait a second. No, it won't, because whoever's taking that job also has their own regular season to worry about. Dumb comment by me. But yes, beginning of December, I think that's in play.
Well, if you mean by bowl season, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, it depends. Like, are they going to get a guy who's in a conference championship game competing for a playoff spot? If they're going to get a guy who isn't, then they could do it by December. But there's a few variables in play. But that would be the only thing stopping Penn State from getting a coach by the beginning of December.
John Gruden, baby.
Nope. Guy, I didn't think John Gruden was that good in Tampa Bay ever, beyond winning
beyond the 1 year.
Yeah, he was gifted the greatest defense who ever lived and beat a team that didn't change their plays from when he was the head coach. So congrats on that.
Maybe if the Ravens move on from John Harbaugh, they pull a Michigan and grab one of the Harbaugh brothers. Who knows? That's a joke.
Yeah, dude, we'd be getting like the value time Harbaugh. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't see Bisciotti moving on from John Harbaugh after a rough year. I mean, he's done pretty well and Lamar's hurt, so he has like a reason. I mean, I get John got the Super Bowl over Jim, but I mean, I don't think John's a recruiter. He's more of a pro coach.
And when is it ever gone well where a great NFL coach with no college experience goes to college, and
vice versa too?
Yeah,
I mean,
and there are exceptions. Jim Harbaugh being a big one, going from college to the NFL. Jimmy Johnson, obviously, but as far as a guy who was an NFL guy and then went to college, has that ever worked? I can't really.
Pete Carroll was the only one that comes to my mind where it really worked.
Yeah, that is true.
But Pete Carroll wasn't a great NFL coach. He just, figured it out.
He started with the Jets and the Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Pete Carroll did both. He left the NFL for college and did great, and then left college for the NFL and did great. You got to be one of the more, if you're valuing the full body of work, and we're getting off topic, but the full body of work for college and then winning in college in the NFL, I think Pete Carroll might be somewhat underappreciated.
Oh, absolutely.
I think so. I think that's a fair argument.
Colin Cowherd had that hot take about Jim Harbaugh being the greatest coach ever for what he did in college and the pros. But what about Pete Carroll? If he's in the conversation, if you're using that argument.
Dude, Barry Switzer, baby.
He was
the king at Oklahoma, and then he went to the Cowboys and won a Super Bowl.
He was gifted the Super Bowl.
John Gruden.
Still got it. You try to take that ring from him.
No, he didn't keep the ring. Neil O'Donnell helped him out too.
Really ticked off Troy Aikman in his final time there.
Yeah, and I agree with you guys that this search is it has to be wrapped up by middle of December. Anything longer, you start to wonder what's going on. I mean, they may have the person, and the person's just we're having to wait. But the longer you wait, it invites, a lot of uncertainty. So again, that's
Yeah,
going to
and
pull
I
back
think
into.
the only way it should even last into the middle of December is if they hire a guy who has to coach in a conference championship game.
Speaking of the Ravens, Trent Dilfer just got fired.
I did see that. Yeah, that happened, I think, right before we went on air.
I
But
mean,
he is not
perfect.
he
I
is
mean,
not a candidate.
No.
All right. So
perfect. We
on
could have.
all right, so on that note, what is the legacy of James Franklin gonna be? Because this is a guy, we mentioned the good things he did, we mentioned his shortcomings. What do you think his overall legacy at Penn State is going to be? I'll go first with my take. I'm going to turn my light on. That was overdue. There we go. I'll go first with my take on James Franklin's legacy. I really do think it depends on whatever his successors do at Penn State. Because if you go to a place like Alabama and not win a championship, that you're going to be judged forever, because you think about the guys that won championships with Bama. Nick Saban did it. Bear Bryant did it. Stallings did it. Wallace Wade did it. They have, like, I think 5 or 6 statues of coaches. Penn State has one great coach that won 2 national championships before James Franklin. So he's the only guy you'd be judged against. I think if Penn State goes the next however many years without winning a title, people are going to appreciate James Franklin more. It's like, hey, this guy couldn't get it done, but nobody else we hired couldn't get it done either. So maybe Penn State's just not a national championship winning place. But if Penn State does get to a place where it's beating the Ohio States of the world and winning Big Tens and winning national championships, then people are going to look at that and say, why couldn't James Franklin do what so-and-so could? So I think where it sits right now, Franklin's legacy is overall positive. Won a lot of football games, put a lot of guys in the pros, but at the end of the day, Penn State made the decision that had to be made. What do you guys think?
So, and like I said, I'm attempting to do this in my column, so I'm going to give some thoughts on it. Just to reply to what you said, Joe, when you said Penn State only has one good coach, Hugo Besdick, Bob Higgins,
But
Rick Van
never those guys won national titles, though.
they're all
No,
in the
that was
College
my point.
Football Hall of Fame. They're all in the College Football Hall of Fame. So that has to mean something. I said this before in a couple other columns, and I've put this elsewhere. James Franklin has one of the more secure legacies of all time. Grant you, everything fell apart this year, and you're going to have to tell this. This is going to be a line in it, but it's not going to be the overarching theme. This is a guy that, when he started his head coaching world, went to Vanderbilt and did things at Vanderbilt that hadn't been done in 100 years. He came to Penn State in the teeth of the sanctions and weathered that storm and transformed he modernized the program in every aspect. Like everything that we see that goes on up there, that's a different take than what Joe did. It's James Franklin. Like everything is modernized in his thing. He's been like a huge aspect of that, and he transformed Penn State not only from modernize it, but they took him from the depths of what those sanctions were to being almost a perennial top 10 team every year. I mean, this is a guy that, a lot of people like to say James Franklin's a recruiter. Let me at least enlighten you guys a little bit. And this is part of his legacy, men. If you were to take the rankings, and I did this the other day, and I did it through 247, and you did the recruiting rankings of every one of Franklin's recruiting classes, and you did it in comparison to the rest nationally. James Franklin averaged the number 18 recruiting class every year. That's kind of where he is. And he, when you think of the teams that are around him, in there, Miami and Tennessee are the 2 above him, and the 2 below him are Ole Miss and South Carolina. I can guarantee you here, guys, Penn State has vastly outperformed those schools. He doesn't get enough credit for coaching up talent and taking 2 and 3 stars and turning them into something more than they were. His indictment will always be the big game failures, the top 10, thing. Only Frank Beamer, for a coach that participated in 20 or more top 10 games, has a worse winning percentage. That's his indictment. His other indictment is, Ohio State just happens to be on such a historic run. If any, like while I was in the box yesterday, they had on the Ohio State Illinois game. Do you guys know in 85, I believe it's 85 out of 86 games of Ryan Day's tenure at Ohio State has been ranked in the top 10. He has the highest percentage of games in there. And you look at what Urban Meyer did preceding him, and I think he won 85 to 90% of his games at Ohio State. His biggest indictment was he was unfortunately the coach that was beside something very historic over in Columbus and couldn't get over the hump. And it just, that psychology broke him in so many other big games because he had so many heartbreaks. And ultimately, he made the program a better place. That's my legacy on James.
I think that's a very good legacy overall on him. Personally, what I always liked about James Franklin was he was able to modernize the program, but also really kept a lot of the tradition.
Yep.
Like so many players here that you see, the nameplates, the last name's not on the back, something Bill O'Brien did, which was Bill O'Brien trying to give his spin on it. But the blue buses, I mean, Paterno coming in those high school blue buses, and now it's kind of the more modernized coach buses that they bring, just something small. But I always thought that was cool that he modernized that, but they kept the tradition alive of them showing up to games. With that, the locker rooms, the way that they modernized those locker rooms, I think in 16 or 17, I think it was 16. And that was really cool as well. But ultimately, I mean, he brought back Penn State to being a recruiting pool in the home front on the state. They were able to win the state a majority of the time in their recruiting base. I know there's some outliers, but majority of the time he did that. And I think that's always something that for the next head coach, he now has those resources that James Franklin and Bill O'Brien both didn't. So I think that is ultimately what his legacy should be, and we'll see what comes of it. But I kick it back to you, Joe.
Yeah, we're gonna wrap it up here. We could talk for hours about this, but as beat writers, we got a lot to do. I do, Kyle does, so we're gonna end it at just about an hour. Thank you everybody for turning in. Hope we passed the audition. We'll be doing plenty more live streams going forward, but this has been a very an unprecedented edition of Joe and the Fat Man.
Good night, Canada.